On this special edition of Ripped from the Headlines Live, we speak with attorney Warner Mendenhall. He's been in the battle against COVID-19 foolishness, among other things. And in this episode, he shares details with us that you need to know, including an event that's happening in Central Florida this coming Friday afternoon. Ripped from the Headlines Live is next. Stay tuned. And welcome back to Rip from the Headlines. This is R.C. Williams. We have an extra special guest with us today. We rarely do special segments like this, but the information and the event we're going to talk about a bit later is so important. We are blessed to have Warner Mendenhall to join us. Warner, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a blessing, man. You are one of a number of freedom fighters that we know that are working hard to combat what's going on with the COVID-19 foolishness. And we were talking off air before, you've been working on some other stuff. But for our audience who does not know you, let's talk about your background a bit, and then we'll get into some of the fight that's happening right now.
Well, real quickly, I got into politics on the Democratic side in Akron, Ohio in the early 1990s and got elected to council, served a couple of terms there. I was not a lawyer. I ran a small business. My brothers still run those businesses. There's a Mendenhall Construction that one brother owns and Mendenhall Painting another one owns. But I decided after I got a taste of what was going on at City Hall that I needed some tools. And I was in my mid-30s and I went back to school. I went to law school and immediately began to deal with the corruption and problems that I saw in the city, fraud in grant programs, violations of people's charter rights, constitutional rights, and in fact worked with the FBI to help clean up the city a bit. So I started out initially, I guess, sort of as my own whistleblower, helping to clean up the city, and really helping to clean up what was a very problematic Democratic administration. But that really opened my eyes to things, and I really realized that they were gutting our city financially over time, and they have really done that to the nation as well. If your viewers have ever read, I think it's called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's an old book, but it's a game or a play that we made against other countries to indebt them and control them. Well, I saw the same thing happening in my city. Tried to do what I could to stop it. Wasn't wholly successful. But the same thing has happened to the nation and is happening to the nation now. And it basically destroys our independence, makes us indebted, beholding, controllable. And I think that's ultimately what the whole COVID crisis was about, was control. So I've spent 25 years of my life litigating against government overreach, corporate excesses, corporate and government crimes. And so when COVID happened, to me, it fell right in that slot. Government overreach, crimes occurring, government lying to us. It was just at such a massive scale that, I think many of us, were trying to figure out what do we do? And we began to litigate as quickly as we could. And that certainly has grown. I held the first COVID litigation conference along with Steve Kirsch in March of 2023. We have since had two more conferences since then. The final one was just a couple of weeks ago in Denver. And we've kind of changed our approach a little bit. As you can see, the website I have linked to my name is freedomcouncil.org, because we understand now, I think most people understand, this is a control system that's going into place, and they're trying to destroy our democratic rights, our sovereignty as a nation. And we are rapidly losing our country. And Freedom Council is a way to maintain our freedoms and to fight, along all the battle lines that we have, which is beyond COVID at this point. There's many other battle lines.
So Warner, how this is hard, but I know that folks who watch and read our work, how did this happen? And when I'm talking about how or what, I'm talking about COVID-19. Like, how did they manage to do something on such a massive scale that was really kind of a polycrisis war against humanity? How did they do this?
How did they do it? I mean, obviously they planned. I mean, we saw that event 2001. We can see the planning. We can see the documents that have been put out. So that planning occurred pre-pandemic, and then they launched the plan. You know, it was very interesting. We actually, at our conference a couple of weeks ago, Colonel James Zitlow, who was on the original pandemic planning in 2007, came to address our conference to give us the history. Had this been a real crisis, and had they used the real plan, it would have looked very, very differently. Almost everything they did was wrong, according to Colonel Zitlow, and the plan they actually had to deal with a respiratory pandemic. That book, which they spent years developing, was thrown out the window. And instead, things happened like masking, which destroys people's identity, causes people to be fearful. Social distancing, again, helps to break up the families, breaks up our social connections. And then fear, which also breaks up our connections as people respond differently to the fear. I know that happened in my life and probably in your life. Your life is that people who you thought were very close friends went a completely different direction on you, and all of a sudden didn't understand where you were coming from. So it really, and even within families, this helped to break up families. But I think, there is an overall effort to destroy the unipolar world that the United States has been, basically dominating since at least the fall of the Soviet Union. And they want to knock the United States off its pedestal. China clearly wants to be ascendant, and it's trying to take that role on. I don't think it will succeed, but it's also, importantly for us, it's really changing how we live in our republic, here within the United States, and it's an attack on freedom. So, and it's happening in many, many ways, and I think that's why I say we're sort of post-COVID now, because we are beginning to understand how many directions that attack is coming from. It's coming in the gender-affirming care side of things with the children and the medicalization of childhood. It's coming with the smart meters, which I just told you we won a temporary restraining order against the city yesterday on the smart meters, and that's interesting too. I'll have to remember to go back to that a little bit. It's coming, in the financial controls that we see that, if you have a nonprofit like ours, Stripe will shut you down and you can no longer process payments or donations, things like that. So all of these areas of life. So I think what freedom counselors are doing, and there are about 250 of us right now, we're aware of all these attacks, and we're doing what we can through the law and through the courts to try to roll this back and maintain the space of freedom that we need to have in this country.
So Warner, we talked off the air about some of the cases that you've tackled, and there have been some big ones. Can you talk to us about some of those cases? And then I know you mentioned post-COVID, but we're still dealing with some of the impacts of those, particularly with the military. Can you walk us through some of those cases and actually what's going on now?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Let me kind of start at the top. We are working with Brooke Jackson and suing Pfizer for fraud in the clinical trials. The federal government, interestingly, recently is trying to intervene in the case in order to dismiss it. They have claimed that it's contrary to the public health policy of the United States. For us to prove up, or not, whatever happens at court, for us to even have a case about whether there was fraud in the clinical trials. And, the thing about that is we know that they lied to us about the data. Basically, the data comes down to 170 people. That based on those 170 people, they started with 43,000, but the data that they used to justify these shots was only 170 people.
Wow.
And that justified shots going into billions and billions of people worldwide, and billions and billions and billions and billions of shots given, because they're given multiple times. So, and then if you look at that data overall, you have a higher death rate in the people who got the shots. This is in the clinical trial. This isn't later on. So the evidence was there that if you got the shot in the clinical trial, you were more likely to die. If you got the shot in the clinical trial, in the first 2 weeks, more people who got the shot got COVID than the ones who did not get the shot. So they actually had a higher infection rate in the clinical trial of those who got the shot in the first 2 weeks, which of course don't count. Those first 2 weeks don't count as having been vaccinated. That's how they massaged and played with the data in a very simple explanation. So, I mean, you find this stuff out. I'm smiling because it's almost funny. It's so crazy. It's laughable. Right. The clinical trials are laughable. And now the government doesn't want to let me go in and make that argument to a jury. Give me a chance, man. Right? So
unbelievable. So you're saying that the U.S. government does not want you to make that case in front of a jury. So let's talk. We talked about Pfizer. What other cases are going on? And then what's happening with the military? Because we talked off air too. We have a personal story of a friend of ours whose daughter is dealing with that right now, being in the military.
Yeah. All of these cases I are, started in COVID, but have larger implications. So particularly with the military, we saw this mandate for the COVID shot. Well, now we are actually fighting for nurses, for example, in the military who are being mandated to take an ineffective flu shot. In fact, and they're denying, just like they denied exemptions, religious exemptions, medical exemptions under the COVID shot, they're doing the same thing regarding the flu shot. And you and I were discussing, these flu shots are dangerous. They can have very severe adverse reactions. And people, and on top of that, like the COVID shot, almost completely ineffective. Why would you take something that has a 20, 30% effectiveness rate? And I don't believe that number, frankly. I think that just like with the COVID shot, they've massaged the numbers to create the appearance of effectiveness, but it's not safe and it's not effective. And so we need to protect our military. And if you think about the military in particular, in my view, we've lost about 250,000 military members over these mandates so far. They're retiring, they're leaving. Some of them are having discipline, on and on and on. Mm-hmm. So we're losing. And who are these people who we're losing? These are people who actually evaluated the data, actually thought about whether this was good or bad for them, actually had a religious conviction, actually had a medical issue to deal with. So we have mustered out of our military some of the most ethical, moral, upright people that you can think about. These are the people we want in the military who have morals, who have ethics, who think it through.
Right.
And won't just, say I was just following orders. We'll have, just like Americans have, the military know this. They have a duty to the Constitution. They have a duty to stand up, and many, many thousands, tens of thousands did. And they're all heroes in my book, and they're all out of the military at this point. So we got rid of a lot of our heroes. And I don't mean to cast aspersions on those that remain. And I know the decision is deeply individual. I know many people, did feel that taking the shot was a patriotic duty. I get that. But the people who took it as a patriotic duty at this point, I hope they'll reevaluate it and understand that the country and the leadership of our country betrayed us. And that's what happened there. So let's move on to some other issues. So the military is really critical because we're not going to rebuild the military. And we're having recruiting problems right now, like you can't believe, because nobody wants to go in where stupid decisions are being made. But the next areas that we think are huge, the hospital protocols under COVID are simply hospital protocols that are deadly anyway. And, we're fighting right now over people who died in hospitals, and we're finding a way to hold those hospitals accountable through, battery, lack of informed consent, and even medical malpractice. And we're getting around the PrEP Act because we're finding that they didn't treat many problems that people had when they came into the hospital. So we have a number of cases going. The Karen Michelonis case here in Ohio, we're working on with her sister, Lori Buntel, who is the administrator of that estate. We're working with Scott Shara with the Shara case. Scott's daughter had Down syndrome, and really, when you look at the record, it looks like the hospital just pumped her full of drugs to kill her. And we have a battery claim in that case because of that. But what I want people to be aware of, these protocols that they have set in under Obamacare and with the electronic health records and the control of treatment and patients and doctors, which we believe is illegal, is ongoing. If you go in the hospital right now, you may be hit with a protocol that's deadly, and you better watch what they're doing to your loved one, because they are just, so many people are not making it out of the hospital alive. You got to question everything, and you need to know what your rights are in the hospital. So that's something, again, that we dealt with at the conference. It's an ongoing issue. We're still doing efforts to save people from hospitals and protocols and get them out so they can get treated. You've heard some of those stories during COVID. It's still going on today.
Warner, so it's scary to me that we live in a world where the place that you would expect to get help when you have a medical issue, you have to become somewhat of a medical expert or a process expert to know or to understand or to be able to tell them what they can and can't do. And they would lead you to believe that you can't do that. I'm amazed, and I know others are too, that we actually live in a time and a place where that's the case. It, what can people do, Warner? We'll get to some other stuff in a minute. What can people do here?
I'm going to suggest a book that is really good, that at least helps people to explain what's going on in the hospital. It's called Big Brother in the Exam Room. So Big Brother in the Exam Room, written by a great lady named Twyla Brace. Find it on Amazon. But it will explain and give you the background on what the electronic health record really does. It's really a surveillance system that was put in place that tracks what the doctors are doing and what medicines the patients are doing and controls the protocols that I'm talking about. Wow. And I confess, at the time Obamacare came in, I was not really aware of what that was going to do, but we actually began to sue over some issues under Obamacare. One of those you guys all have experienced and probably know about. You've seen all of these hospital systems expand and grow and buy up small practices and basically start to end the independent practice of medicine. Right. 20 years ago, over half of the doctors were in independent practices. Now they're all getting scooped up into these big organizations. And when they do that, they're really giving up their independence, and they're really giving up the practice of medicine as we knew it. They're instead, performing protocol medicine, which we believe is corporate practice of medicine, which is not individualized, which, sets up these deadly protocols that they don't really deviate from.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that book. I'm still kind of in shock. And listen, I've been a media professional for 3 decades, and it's rare that I'm just like, I shake my head. I'm just like, I am absolutely shocked that this is happening. But see, this is why it's important that voices like yours and the things that you're doing, that we work to get the word out however we can. You mentioned Lori a minute ago. She's a dear friend of both of us. And it is so heartbreaking to hear what these people did. We've talked with James Rogowski, who has covered the WHO, and I don't know if you have a take on this, but you're fighting here, and you're fighting against the federal court system in the U.S. Do you see any impact, Warner, on what the WHO is trying to do with these health treaties or whatever they're trying to do now?
Well, we need to watch these international bodies that have grown up, and also think of Gavi as well. The WHO, Gavi, Gavi. Become aware of these groups. What we're creating, and Bill Gates is funding these, a lot of them. We're creating these supranational organizations, and we're actually giving them immunities, prosecutorial immunities, as if they're nations, as if they're diplomats.
Wow.
We've really got to watch. These international bodies want to be protected from being charged criminally. They want to be above the sovereign nations, and this is the backdoor in to strip us of sovereignty and to gain control of the population. So as long as we can become very aware of that, I think we can fight them. I mean, a treaty does have to get approval by the Senate. I know there's these executive agreements that get entered into all the time. We got to watch those, but we cannot let any of these treaties, any of these agreements get through our Senate. We've got to maintain our sovereignty. That's the key issue. And I do think people in this country have awakened to enough of an extent that we're going to raise hell about it with our representatives. And I think representatives who go the wrong way, we need to identify them and make sure they are out of office as fast as we can.
Warner, you're such a great resource, and I'm glad we're doing this and we're able to air this, and we're going to make sure it's available for people, and we'll continue to promote it because this information is key. And we always say, because we own a market research business, that's what Sherlock is forewarned is forearmed. Like, don't ignore these things because you think they're quote unquote conspiracy theory. That doesn't exist anymore. This is real life, and they've gotten you so snowed and so distracted that you think things that are happening around you or to you, like a COVID, are something completely different than what they actually are. And this is why discussions like this are important. And speaking of which, Warner, you're actually going to be here in Central Florida at the end of this week. Can you tell us a little bit about the event that's going to happen?
I'm just coming in briefly. I'll be in Friday morning and be appearing at an event live with Nick Caterano, and he was gracious enough to invite me down there. And we're going to be talking about things like the hospital protocols that people faced and are still facing. We're going to be talking about vaccine injuries, quote unquote vaccines. But the vaccine injuries and what's happened to people and how we really have a lost and forgotten and ignored population that I believe at this point is in the hundreds of thousands that really badly need our nation to step up. They, again, going back to our discussion earlier, I think a lot of these people took it because they thought they were doing the right thing. They thought it was their patriotic duty. Well, now we've left them on the side of the road, penniless, vaccine injured. Many have lost everything. Many have committed suicide. Many have contemplated suicide because of the situation that they found themselves in. And we as Americans need to stand up and support the injured. And I know some of the vaccine injured will be at the event and we'll be talking. So we have some real tasks that we need to do as a society. And we'll be talking about that at the event on Friday. And you may have the details in front of you. I wish I had a flyer so I could post it on the screen or something. But
that's okay. That's okay, Warner. So I'll link it. I'll link it in the show notes for this. And when we publish today, the name of the event is "We Can't Forget How They Are Getting Away with Murder." So this event takes place Friday, June 28th. 2 p.m. to 6:30. It's in Gotha. So the address is 1450 Citrus Oaks Avenue in Gotha, here in Central Florida. Again, we'll post this information and a link for you to get tickets. The tickets are $10 a piece. It is certainly to support a good cause. So if you can attend, we strongly encourage you to do that. And again, we'll post a link for that information in the notes today. Warner, before we let you go, I want to make sure people know how to support you and the great work that you're doing. So if you'll take a minute, just let people know how they can support you, what you guys need, and what people can do to help.
Well, thank you very much for saying that to your audience. You can support us at freedomcouncil.org. There's a donation button on that site. That's probably the best way to do it. I think that, you said, we're never going to forget. Here's the other thing. We can't stop doing. We have to keep moving forward. We have to address the problems that have been created, and we have to help people who've been injured and have lost loved ones through this crisis. So, we have to be forward looking, and we have to take care of our community of people who have been injured and damaged by this horrific event. So that's what we're doing. And our, Freedom Council is up to about 250 attorneys right now. Donations to Freedom Council help to support the litigation all over the United States. It helps to get materials to the lawyers. It helps bring speakers to the lawyers. It helps the lawyers in many, many ways. So that organization, I think, is a critical, army in this fight. And the other thing that I think, from a very, from a spiritual perspective, I think COVID has awakened us as well to something that I think is insidious. We've been very much a consumer society, going along in a very comfortable life. And we have, I think, as a society, I think there's many individuals fighting, but as a society, we have to realize that there is there is a price to maintain, our liberties. And that price is eternal vigilance. We know that old saying. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And eternal vigilance means that we are going to have to, like our founding fathers did, we're going to have to use our wealth, use our money, use our time, use our energy in this fight to save our nation. I do believe we're at an almost existential crisis here. And people are sacrificing. Many people have sacrificed. But if you're listening to this, I really do want people to think about this. Eternal vigilance is going to demand a sacrifice, and it's going to demand your time, your thought, your awareness, and your money. I mean, I hate to say it, but cases move on money, and there's just not enough awareness. And we need to support the victims. Look at groups like React 19, that as a group of vaccine injured victims and families of vaccine injured victims. Support react19.org as well. Support Children's Health Defense. Support ICANN. Support Truth for Health Foundation, Dr. Lee Vliet's group. All of these great organizations have been in there from the beginning, and we need to support all of them. And you may have some others you may want to suggest, but and support individuals who are hurt. Some of the individuals who will be at the event have Give, Send, Goes. You can support them on there. So please seek them out and find them and help out to the extent that you can.
Yeah. And it comes in all forms. There is money, there is time, there are connections and relationships. There are platforms like this one. If we all do everything we can do, a ton is going to get done. And God always provides, and it will show up when needed if we do our part, Warner, which is what you mentioned. We need to do something and take action. We're called biblically to do that. And we certainly appreciate you doing it. Attorney Warner Mendenhall joining us on Rip from the Headlines Live, the special edition. Warner, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much.